on there, YouTube? Welcome to another episode of RCengineering. So, you heard me talking about this gasser build. You've seen I've done some mock-ups and stuff on my Instagram. And going to use this body here from Nightcrawler's 3D. This is the 5-window coupe, the chop version. And I've started doing a little body work. It's been too cold to really paint, so I just did a little bit of sanding. I need to go pick up some more Tamiya putty because I have to fill some gaps in it and stuff like that. But I need it here for my mock-up. I've been brainstorming for a while of what this chassis is going to look like. All my other builds, they're all different. The number 3 build failed because the chassis design was just not solid enough. It had too big of a step in the front. The number 2 build worked out perfect somehow, magically. On the number 4, the farm truck build, I did something different. I didn't step the front of the frame. The rails have the step in the back, and it comes down and it goes straight forward. And everything's just higher on the front end. I got that idea looking at actual rat rod pictures. But this is going to be a gasser. And it's going to be full leaf springs, front and rear. And it's going to set up probably a little higher in the front. So it's going to be something completely different. Now, some of the gasser pictures and stuff I've seen, they're just straight rails all the way back. And this is where you really got to do some thinking, because I can't just do that. I'm afraid it would be way too tall. I know the limitations of the RC components. You see, I've got my rear tire and axle on leaf springs already. And by the time you factor in your hanger and your shackles, it's going to put your chassis up pretty dang high. So I think I'm going to step it down a little bit. I'm going to do something similar like I did on number 2, where, where's another piece of metal? I'm going to just stack the pieces over here. So it's going to be the middle and then the front. And we'll angle it down a little bit. And the same thing on the back. So it's going to be up half an inch higher front and rear. The center of the frame will be down lower underneath the body. Still won't stick down below the body, but I want to tuck especially the rear suspension, up in the body just a little bit. I don't want it all hanging out. The front's going to be all hanging out because it's open wheeled and open hood and all that. So I've got some cardboard here. Got my tape measure. Got my Sharpie. Gotta find my square. And I'm going to try to get this at least on cardboard today. I'm trying to do something else too. I'm trying to plan a little further ahead. Each build I've learned more and more. I'm going to figure out better placement for my cross members. Because even on the farm truck build, one of my cross members is pretty close to where my transmission needed to be. So I had to notch it a little bit to clear the R4. And I made it work, but I just want to get better and better at looking ahead on these. So, I had this laid out here. I've got my frame the same length as the cardboard. Got my rear axle centered on the body line. And I've given myself about as much space as I think I need for the front. And I can bring in, this is a good scale engine for this body. And it still seems a little bit long. So I'm not sure yet. I like the wheelbase, but I don't like the placement. And I still haven't decided either if I'm going to run a grill on this body. You see a lot of the old gasser dragsters, everything was in the back. You didn't have any grill shell, you didn't have any radiator up front. They were strictly quarter-mile car. It didn't need a whole lot of cooling system. So it was all removed, and it was just straight engine and body. I don't know if I'm going to use this engine. I still haven't decided that far along on this build yet, but if I move the leaf spring back, that'll put the tire, let me find one here, that'll put the tire just ahead of the motor. I really think I need it a little bit further ahead than that. Somewhere right at the front, like the axle lined up with the first set of cylinders on the engine. And that'll still give me space if I decide to put a fuel tank or something on the front. I know I've seen a lot of that have a little gas can, little fuel cell mounted up front, little spun aluminum thing. Maybe we can get another one of those fuel tanks like I did on the farm truck. So that's why I'm leaning more towards that. I would have springs on this axle, but I'm missing parts. Since this is gonna be the first time I've actually mounted a semi-truck axle with leaf springs like it's supposed to be. I don't have the I have the U-bolts to hold it to the leaf springs, but I don't have the plates that go on the bottom. I used those on the number 1 build. I cut them in half and made the cantilever arms for my front suspension. So I'm having a hard time finding those. I can only find like the entire suspension set on eBay, and they're freaking like $70. I hate to do that for 2 little pieces of aluminum, but the pieces are so small, I don't think I can make them myself precise enough. So I don't know. If I get them, I know I'll end up using other components of that. I'm still working through bags of other semi-truck components that I bought before. But yeah, so I'm going to start marking stuff here. I can't just mark cut here and cut here, because then when I overlap the pieces, it'll shorten, and then my wheelbase will be off. So I have to make a cardboard template like I've done before, and then we'll cut and put the frame together on the cardboard template. And then once we get that welded, then I'm going to go ahead, the next step will be drilling holes for cross members. I'm going to use my, what is it, I don't know what size it is. It's a little bit larger diameter steel tube. It's not hollow, but it's a flat stock, but it's round. And I use that for cross members on the number 4 farm truck build, and it worked out excellent. I had a drill bit the exact size so I could force it together, and it would kind of hold while I mocked it up and got everything square, and it made the process of welding the chassis together a lot more stable, a lot more sturdy with my rickety tabletop vise I've got, and it came out a heck of a lot more square than previous builds have. So just trying to improve on my process every time. So anyway, I'm going to quit rambling. I'm going to start measuring stuff out here. Alright, so try to do a better job of explaining here what I've got going. So I've drawn two planes here, and this is going to be our front section, this is going to be our rear section, and this is going to be our middle section. So all I did was just eyeball where about I want the step to occur. Now I've marked the center of my axles on each end, and I'll put my leaf spring there, and now we can kind of see how much space we're actually going to have to use a leaf spring hanger. And I've got several different options, you know, like a Trail Finder 2, or to me a semi-truck, which I'll probably use. I have more of those. So that way I know how much space I actually need. I accidentally drew a line up there, don't pay attention to that. It happens. But typically I'll cut at a 45, and then that way I can just overlap the pieces, and I'll have a good clean 45 on both edges. So looking at this, it's going to be tight up in there. I may have to actually shorten that down a little bit. Front I'm not worried about. The front is going to be well ahead of the dip, because the front end is going to be longer, and I'm hiding the frame drop down behind the cowl. So but the rear is going to be the tricky part. So this is going to be my end of the frame. I may actually have that wrong. I think I actually do. Yeah, so that's going to be the end of my frame. So that works out a little better. It's confusing, especially when you put a bunch of wrong marks here on your paper. Or on your cardboard. So, kind of eyeballing it. My axle set's just a tick to the rear of the body, but that's going to allow me more space. Otherwise, if I don't leave enough in here, that's, you know, like all your RC chassis, they have that dip down in the center. That's where your transmission or transfer case or something goes. That's just typically how real cars are designed. So That's what I'm looking at, and I'm just laying the springs out here as a ballpark. I know it's going to actually be hanging like down there, but I'm using the center point that I marked on the leaf spring to gauge roundabout how much space I've got. See, if it's hanging down here, I've got plenty of room for my hanger. And then if that's the end of the frame, I've got plenty of room for my shackle and to be at a good angle. Same on the front. So, that being said, now I'm going to take my steel. This piece already has a nice 45 cut on it, which I don't really need, but I like to start at the front and kind of work my way back. I'm going to go ahead and chop this stuff down, and we'll lay it on piece by piece and test fit on the cardboard template and see what we got. Alright, so you see what I've done here. That's our base section of the chassis. I went ahead and reused the end that was already had the 45 cut in it. And it's not an exact science, you know, I'm kind of free-handed that and I'm eyeballing the cut, so it's not perfect, but it's not required for this because we're just going to lay the other piece on top of it and we'll weld them together that way. Now, I get asked all the time that the frame is going to be a C-channel, but I start with this square tubing because nobody makes C-channel that size. It's impossible to find. I've searched industrial supply places everywhere you could think of, and it just does not exist. A 1/2 inch C-channel steel. The aluminum's out there, but you know, it takes a special skill to weld aluminum there, and I barely have a setup to do steel, so that my new Makita grinder there, it working pretty well. Makes quick work of this, so I'm hoping when it comes time to cut this square in half, I can get a lot cleaner edge than I have normally using a Dremel, and hopefully it'll be a lot less messy. I still have an idea of making some kind of jig to mount that thing to, where I can run the steel through and cut it like a table saw almost with that. But that's still a ways off, and I think this build will be past that point before I get the chance to explore that option. So now I'm going to grab my piece off of the vise and bring it back over, and we'll mark to do our next section of frame. Oh, good Lord, I got it tight enough. There it is. Alright. So we'll look at the back, and there's no rule how much to overlap this, and you don't have to do 45s to overlap it. You could do it square. I just like the way it looks once it's welded together. You've got these nice edges. The more the merrier, the way I look at it. It's going to be stronger. I'm probably going to do almost 3/4 of an inch here, and I'm going to leave my end long, a little bit long, just because I don't want to I'm still not 100% sure on where my end is. I've got it marked in 2 places. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this at the furthest back spot. If you can even see that. I'm going to cut it here, and I can always come back and chop it off later. And this is just going to be a straight cut, so it should be a lot quicker. And I need to mark also on here where these are going to join. That way there's no confusion onto the length later. And I'll go ahead and mark my center of my axle while I'm at it. So now when I go to put them back together, I know that end goes there, that end goes there. That's just the center of the axle, and that's where the end of the body is supposed to be. So let's chop that up. Alright, it's a good idea to let your metal cool down a little bit before you lay it on your cardboard so you don't burn your template or your house down. Yeah, just cut it off nice and square at the back. It didn't come out perfectly even because my safety glasses like to fog up in here because it's freezing. But I smoothed it out the best I could. I ended up taking a little bit off the end. But we'll grab a leaf spring here. Still got plenty of meat on the back, so I'm not worried about that. Now the front end is going to be a little bit longer, but it's going to be the exact same thing. I don't have a 45 unless I have another piece laying around with one already cut in it, which that would save me a little bit of trouble, but it doesn't look like I do. So I'm going to go ahead and chop a 45 on it, and then I'm going to bring it back over here and we'll lay it out and mark it up. Alright, so here's my front piece. I'm going to do the same thing I did. I'm going to mark ballpark where my center line of my axle is going to be, which can always be adjusted. Going to mark where I'm going to cut it. I'm going to mark where that end sits and where this end sits on here. If I can hold it together. That way, we know it's hard to draw all that out on the template, because without having the angles and stuff cut, seeing how much you're comfortable with overlapping. I went with a little more in the front just because I can. It's going to be hidden, and it's just going to help the rigidity, because you got to remember, I'm still going to cut this in half. So it may be overkill totally as square tubing, but when you cut that square tubing that's been welded in half, then it can get kind of flimsy. So you got to think ahead as far as structural integrity goes. So I'm going to chop this piece and come back. So we'll line up our marks, and there's our basic frame. Not much to it. The real trick is getting it welded all nice and straight, and then once we cut it in half, getting the halves nice and straight. Now I don't always keep them straight. Sometimes they taper to the front or to the rear, but this one being leaf sprung front and rear, it's going to have to be pretty well straight and all the way front to back, because the leaf springs have to be at a certain width to line up with the axle perches. The little pads on the axles where the leaf springs actually attach, they don't adjust, so that the frame has to be right where it needs to be, which is not a problem. We can set it once we weld this together, then we drill our holes for our cross members. Then we'll be ready to split the rail and make the RC channels. Then we can set the wheelbase off of the suspension, and then we can weld our cross members in. So it's a balancing act. But let me see what we can work on next. I'm not sure what I want to do today. Alright guys, so that's where we're at. Got my welds looking a little better. I cleaned them up. They don't look that great now, but I did I'm learning. Got a decent bead going. I had it good and clean, and everything was jobbing pretty good. The frame rails are damn near perfectly straight. Next step is going to be drilling holes for the cross members. Now I've got to figure out where I want them. I need several, but I've got to leave space in key areas to allow for mounting the scale engine, mounting my suspension hangers, and mounting shocks and stuff like that. The shocks, those will come in later. We'll figure that out as we get further along. I don't think it's going to be as complicated, since it is going to be a higher off the ground build. It's not going to be real low slung like the other builds have been. So I'm thinking, so my hanger's going to be back there. We can do one here at the end. We can do one up here on the top half. I'm going to leave this section open because that's typically going to be where our motor and transmission mount. So I'm going to, I don't want to put a cross member in there yet because I'll probably use some flat bar and make a mount for whatever transmission that I decide to go with. I'm going to do one up here. That way it'll be out of sight and behind where our scale engine is supposed to be. And up front it's going to be tricky. I got to leave space to mount whatever scale engine that we use. And I need to leave space for our front shackles. So it needs to be back a little bit from the very end. Our shackles are going to be pretty far forward. So I'm going to go ahead and put one about ½ an inch back. I got to find the right drill bit. We'll hook up the drill press and get those done through nice and even. Alright, so that was a 1/4 inch drill bit. It fits my round stock perfectly. I had a piece of it. I don't know where it went. So yeah, the next step is going to be cutting this bad boy in half, I think. I need to, well, I've got to wait on suspension parts. That's where I'm stuck. I don't have enough Trailfinder 2 or semi-truck axle hangers and things like that. And I can't get that front axle done without those little blocks. So I'm kind of stuck, but I needed to go ahead and knock this part out while I was thinking about it, because I think it's gonna fit pretty well. Let me see if I can get it mocked up here a little bit for you. It's a very rough idea. I'm gonna have to do some cutting on the body to clear the axle, so I can get the rear end down a little bit. Because right now the body's setting straight on the axle housing at the tire, so it won't go down as far as it needs to go. And it's really hard to, that front axle won't stay put without leaf springs on it. It keeps flopping to the back of the front. So yeah, the back's a little bit higher than it will be. I'm hoping to at least get it level with the front, if not just a little lower. If need be, I can come back and chop that rear end off the frame and raise it a little higher. We'll just have to see how it comes out. I think the base design's going to work. It's just getting all the suspension and stuff. Like I said, this build, I've been brainstorming this for a while now. And that tire's a little further. There you go. A little further forward than that. Now we may have to go even a little further forward on the front. Now I'm not sure yet if I'm going to have the shackle on the front of the suspension, front suspension, or the hanger on the front of the front suspension. So there's lots of variables at play. I've got to get all my parts in-house before we can start looking at that. So it may take a while before there's another installment on this, but I just wanted to get some progress done. I think I need to lower the rear, about another ½ inch. And the front height I think will be alright. So got to keep that nose up on the gasser. But anyways, appreciate you sticking with me and watching the fabrication here. I'm not quite ready. I would go ahead and cut this chassis in half, but I'm going to wait till I get all my suspension. And then hopefully I can drill the mounting holes for the suspension while it's still square and get them exactly even from side to side. That way there's no issues later when it comes time to actually bolt it all together. That was some of the mistakes I made with my first attempts at building like this, was cut it in half, had my matching sections, and then I tried to drill everything out and it just wouldn't play nice. So plus I need to get some better drill bits in the right size, 3mm, stuff like that are sharper, because right now all mine are burnt out. But anyways, I appreciate you guys sticking through, and I will see y'all in the next build video. Thanks for watching.